before we even started recording, you said that you used to do ASMR, and I'd like to just immediately get that out of the way. You used to be an ASMR creator, is that right?
I did, yeah. Back in sort of maybe like 2012 through 2014, I had a YouTube channel and I was making ASMR content, and it was basically the I guess the vehicle of it was in sort of like fantasy scenarios, but where you don't really understand that something fantastical is happening. Like it would be quite sort of, like a standard ASMR kind of scenario would be like a hotel check-in where the sort of audio triggers people are enjoying is like you talking softly and then clicking on the keyboard. But what would be sort of slowly revealed as I was saying it was sort of like, and would you require a coffin in your, room, and are you going to need a fridge for the blood bags and stuff like that? Like, okay, it's a vampire hotel. Like, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so, was it really popular? Because it's a big thing, isn't it? SM, I can never remember how it goes. I've been following Sommer for quite a while. I'm not sure how I found her. I'd just say in the feminist space, you will love her. You will love this episode and then go and just start following her and listening. She's fact-based. She's researched. She's incredibly intelligent, compassionate, and she's also no bullshit. She's got a great sense of humour. Please enjoy this episode with Sommer Tothill. I wanted to get you on because you are a feminist. Let's just get straight into this with basic questions. What is feminism?
What is feminism? It's a big question, but I think the most simple way I can put it is that feminism is the social and political movement to end gender-based oppression, that is, not depression, which maybe sounds simple, but as I'm sure you have experienced in your own life and many of your listeners have, gender equality and gender-based oppressions really suffuse and negatively impact every single aspect of women's lives. So feminism is the project to end this negative impact and to dismantle the structures and systems that create this impact. But it's a big project with a really long way to go, which is why I do the work that I do.
Yep. Okay, question number 2, what is the patriarchy?
What is patriarchy? Well, it depends who you ask, because the men in my comment sections don't believe patriarchy exists. Despite the overwhelming and incontrovertible evidence. But I guess in simple terms, patriarchy is it's our society and a culture that is dominated by men, specifically set up to advantage men, where men are facilitated to hold most or all of the power, receive most of the opportunity, chiefly by exploiting women's time, women's attention, women's labour. And one of the key facets of the patriarchy that we live under is that it must, by necessity, oppress women in order to sustain itself. So patriarchy creates a hierarchy and men are at the top. And one of the reasons I think men don't like to acknowledge that this exists is because acknowledging that you benefit from a privilege that hurts others can be difficult to do, but also because some of the ways that, or all of the ways that patriarchy manifests are quite hard to look in the face. Like if you think about patriarchy manifests in things like men's violence against women and male entitlement to women's bodies and their attention and resources. It creates prescribed gender roles, which see women set up essentially to serve men and perform labour for men, which is mostly unpaid and unrewarded. It results in biological essentialism, which is sort of really reductive and dehumanising. It creates this like cultural ridicule of women's behaviour and criticism of all of our choices and kind of like double standards around our choices. It, more importantly, I think it systemically excludes us from political, social and economic power, and thereby reduces our access to resources like money, which is very important. And like it even comes down to stuff that's as simple as the elision of our identities, like the way that women tend to take another man's surname when they get married, which some people don't think is a big problem, but personally I find to be quite violent, really.
Yeah, I do as well. I think you and I are very similar in our thoughts. How did you come to be this way? Where did it start for you?
I would say I have been a feminist as long as I have breathed. Before I even knew the word, I have a really, really strong social justice sensitivity that's just always been there in me. And I was, like a lot of other people, able to perceive inconsistencies and illogical inequalities in the way that like little boys and girls were treated from a really young age. I guess maybe I have like good pattern recognition or something, but I could just see these sort of unfairnesses, which children are so good at seeing unfairness, but I suppose not every child is so stubborn about bucking those and opposing them. And so I've been what would be, I suppose, a person who could perceive gender inequality from the first breath. But I would say I called my feminist once I actually knew that there was a movement and a name for it, which would have been, I guess, probably in my early teens, back when the internet was very fresh and you could find a lot of seditious material online.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's pretty good. Did you have siblings? I mean, do you have siblings?
Yes, I have an older sister.
Okay, so you didn't have any brothers that you saw being treated differently, and that's where, or was it the boys at school being treated differently that you found absolutely?
Just in every context. What's interesting though is I often ask my audience on Instagram what made them become a feminist or become interested in gender equality, and a really common response I get is that they saw their brothers being treated differently. I think it's interesting that even without brothers I was able to see it, but it was definitely like the other little boys on the playground. Like I have sort of like a formative memory from it was definitely grade 1. So let's say I was 5 or 6 years old, and we had, how girls always bloody had to wear a dress as our uniform. We never got to wear shorts.
No, ever.
And we do now, but we didn't then. And I was walking sort of up a hill to my classroom, and this little boy who I didn't particularly like ran up to me before school, so just getting there with my little backpack on. And he runs up to me and he lifts up my skirt and looks at my undies and then like puts it back down and runs off. And the first thing I did, perceiving that the world would be just and kind, is go to my teacher, who was a woman, and I said, hey, Stuart, whatever his name is, just lifted up my dress and looked at my undies. And she said, oh, that was naughty, but I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it, That's just, boys are just naughty.
That's just
something along those lines, like really dismissive of his behaviour. And when you think about it, like that is quite a serious behaviour.
Very, very serious. If an adult did that, very different
jail
reaction to it. Yeah, immediately. But, adults start as children doing it. It's amazing how, it's just that response is such a common response that's what boys do. And I remember, I have a brother and we had foster brothers as well, and not until a lot later, but I remember being very young as well and just saying, why does he get to do something? And it was often because he's a boy, and I would, but it was just like, because he's a boy and boys are different. So suck it up, buttercup. Or because he's older. If I found that if they didn't want to use the because he's a boy in other houses, or even in my own, it would be because he's older. But I found that was happening in other houses. If they're younger, it's like, well, he's younger.
It's funny how adults will just say these bold-faced things without reflecting on how insane they sound. And I think that really is a testament to how much gender inequality is an accretion of, I suppose, dismantling of justices as you grow up. Bit by bit by bit, it chips away at you until you're actually in a different shape, and your brain is in a different shape to the extent that you can't actually recognize it even happening. Like, particularly that one about boys are just different. Like, one of the greatest misogynistic myths out there is that men and women are just wired differently.
Yes.
And we just aren't. Like there was a huge amount of what's called neurotrash, neuroscience in the early 2000s. I don't know if you remember this period in media, but like every week it seemed like they were coming out with a new study that was like, men are like this and women are like this because of evolutionary biology and having to look after children and hunting. You know, men are more visual because they had to look at berries, or I guess it would have been the other way around. Women like color because of berries they were picking, and all of this absolutely trash neuroscience and evolutionary biology and you know, a lot of studies being done on like children to like gauge children's behavior because of their gender. And there's been some really great books that have come out in recent years. A particular one that I love is called The Gendered Brain by Gina Rippon. And she actually goes back and reanalyzes like thousands of those neuroscientific studies, and every single one of them has like a piss poor methodology where you just absolutely can't draw the conclusion that they drew from what the study said. And we increasingly understand that humans all have the same type of brain. Like there's no denying that we have hormones and that hormones can impact the way we feel, the way we think. We have lots and lots. We don't just have sex hormones. We have lots of other types of hormones, you know, hunger and satiety, all that sort of thing. But people tagging boys and girls' behavior and men's and women's behavior to just being wired differently is so troublesome because A, it's not true, and B, it always seems to result in like women being like disadvantaged or being set up to serve men or being excluded from important opportunities.
I was having dinner with friends the other night, just two really old girlfriends that I haven't seen in a while, and they've both got kids. One's only got boys, the other one's got boys and girls. And she said, you know, they're just hardwired differently. It's just so different. And I said, it's not. They're not. They are not hardwired differently. We have the same brains. Like we are taught everything. And she was like, oh, I don't know about that. Like Freddie really likes to just play with trucks. And we didn't teach him that. I said, of course you taught him that. I said, there would have been a time when he was a baby and you would never have thought about it with your daughter, but you would have been taking Freddie out the front to watch the garbage truck. And she went, oh, yeah.
100%.
I said, and if you weren't doing it, his grandparents were doing it, or, you know, his dad was doing it. It's just, it's so there that you don't even realize that you've done it. I said, and just giving toys to children that are so gendered immediately from, you know, girls have got to get dolls and boys have got to get cars. It's such a given. We just do it.
It's even pre-toy. It's even pre-toy. Like, and that's another thing that we're now discovering through more modern studies is that we begin to gender children from the day they are born. The very day they are born, because, you know, something like giving a toy can be really obvious, but it's the things like the way that you speak to them, the way that you direct your eyes, the enthusiasm, the smiles, you know, and like you said, this boy may have been getting held up to watch the truck, but even before he was getting held up to watch trucks going out, you know, out the front door or across the street, he was probably perceiving that when he looked at a truck, his parents would enthusiastically respond, or they would grab a truck very enthusiastically and give it to him. You know, there's so many ways that gender is socialized into us, and we're really fooling ourselves if we don't think that we're not the ones who did it.
No, I know. And it's such a weird thing how many women are into defending the patriarch, and not ever saying that, you know, I'm defending the patriarch. It's like defending that men are so incredibly different and so much more important than us. And, you know, that's just the way it is. It's so incredibly frustrating. And I'm frustrated. You must be frustrated because this is your work. But do you think it's going to change?
Yeah, absolutely. I do, because it always has. I mean, feminism has achieved a huge amount over the last couple hundred years. Like, I'm not sure if you're aware of like the wave structure of how feminism has progressed.
No.
So basically, I guess we could do like a very quick historical primer of feminism.
Yes,
please. So I guess in terms of history, the modern movement, that is like Western feminism, has been around since about the 19th century. And I say Western because women in patriarchies have, made steps towards their own liberation all across the world in different ways. But, in our very Eurocentric society, we haven't necessarily documented the ways that's been done. So the wave system is very Western and European. We're currently in fourth wave feminism. The first wave was back when women literally couldn't own money. They couldn't own property. They couldn't own their own money. If they were unmarried, their money belonged to their father. And once they got married, everything that they owned belonged to their husband. They couldn't vote. They didn't own their own children. So if you happened to somehow be cast aside by your husband, he would take the children because they belonged to him. You could be thrown into a mental institution simply for arguing with a man. So the first wave was really focused on those legal rights and having any sort of political power. The suffragette movement, women's right to vote, right to divorce, even the right to get an education. Like, crazy to think about that now. Mm-hmm. Second wave was in the 60s. So the first wave was quite a long wave because I suppose without digital technology, things can take a while to spread.
Well, yeah, and we had a lot of wars in that wave.
Very true.
In our society.
And wars have actually done a lot to change things for women because taking men out of the workforce and out of the home and out of the family made women
showing
sort of step up.
The world still goes on with us.
Right, which is why probably the second wave did really begin in earnest in the 60s because you've had some time post-war. They now start, you remember the swinging 60s, they're thinking about sexuality and that sort of reproductive liberation because we'd just got the pill, things like that.
In the 50s, they had to market kitchens and housewives as being a really wonderful, important thing to do to get women to get out of the factories and to get out of the roles that they'd all taken on in the 40s while their men were away. They needed them to go back into the kitchen. So they made that 50s housewife a very attractive status thing, marketed all of it, lied to everyone to get it to happen. So is that then how the 60s came, after that?
Yeah, because that traditional 50s housewife trend only lasted about 15 years and it was a lie the whole time, and so then a lot was achieved in the 60s. And then the third wave, which I think probably is the one that you and I came of age in, was around sort of the 80s. So it was that kind of Gen X, girl power, riot girls, like girls can do anything, sort of deprioritizing like having a man and sort of this very much this rise of women being economically independent. So I always think of like Sex and the City as the seminal text of the third wave.
Yeah.
Because they did a lot.
Girl with Melanie Griffith or, all of the John Hughes kind of films not really because they all ended up with men. But, like Molly Ringwald was always, giving the finger to someone and there was it was, a lot of that kind of stuff. Watching those movies in the 80s for me as a young teenager was very – chicks are it, but watching them in hindsight, it's like, well, they still always ended up with a bloke. So did Sex and the City, which is not a bad thing, but it was a very, there was not a lot like there is now of just women's stories on our screens not being about ever really falling in love or having men at all.
Yeah, even the fact that Molly Ringwald was the subject of the story. A young woman was always the subject. It was her perspective, even though she ended up with a man, which I guess is one of the things that defines now that the fourth wave that we're in, that we've been in for about 15 years now, is this concept of decentering men. It's been really heralded by the rise of internet activism and this concept of intersectionality. So how I was saying before, like feminism started off being like, well, our history of feminism is very Western, but now intersectionality is focusing on the various intersections of oppression like race and culture and disability and things like that, phobia and class and poverty and that sort of thing.
I had the worst Christmas day. I ended up having a massive argument with a family member of my brother's wife's side of the family. So we're not related, but he's in the family. And I've actually never spoken to this man before. I've known him for nearly 30 years, but like he's just such wet paint. And I've just never given him 5 seconds, but we were in the same room together and there was a few of us, but he started like doing the incel kind of speak at me, and I'm just like shutting him down like with everything, and he was just getting redder and angrier, and that's the thing, is that they're so angry with us and they just won't believe what we have to say, even though I think they know it's the truth.
I think they do too.
And and that's why they yell so loud. I mean, is that old saying like doth protest so much if
what do they say? Hit dogs holler.
Yes.
If you weren't hit, you wouldn't be screaming about it. If this didn't target you, if you didn't feel like this applied to you.
Exactly. So it was a very, because the thing is that everyone kind of walked in, like they all started to hear a bit of the raised voices, and his side of the family started coming in and going, "Get into him, Yvie. Yeah, because he's a dickhead." And I'm like, what's going on here? Like, there was entertainment for them. I was
Queen behaviour.
Yeah, well, it was
a queen.
The funny thing is, like, I was just hitting him with facts and stats, and he just was hitting me with anecdotes. And I said, "You've got to stop this anecdotal argument side of your argument." And I said, "Do you even know what that means?" And he did not even know what the word anecdote meant.
Oh my goodness!
Anyway, so everyone was really cheering me on, but
doesn't it feel, sorry to interrupt, I was just going to say, doesn't it feel so irritating though that you had to come so correct? You had to come armed with statistics, data, studies. You've spent, a lot of time interviewing women on this podcast, and you are so au fait with women's issues, and you could smash back every argument he had, because men will never take the argument, or men like him will never take the argument, this is women's lived experience, and I know because I am a woman and because I talk to women, and women are not lying about our experiences.
Well, and that's the most frustrating, is that there was no conceding at all. There was no, I didn't know that. And it's so incredibly frustrating. But the most frustrating part of it was everyone really getting into this theatre of it all, not understanding that I was frightened. Like, at the end of the day, I was frightened by this man yelling at me, and because I know how that can end. Everyone does, but it just seems that people just really forget that so easily, and there's certain, parts of society that yelling at women is just a really accepted thing to do, and I was just so incredibly out of my depth in that sense that I never put myself in those kind of situations for obvious reasons to you and to my listeners. But to so many people, they don't understand why you wouldn't stand up for yourself, but they do.
It reminds me of the way that people say not all men, and I always say that's irrelevant because patriarchy benefits all men. So if not all men are perpetrators of violence against women, I mean, that's not the only thing that you can do in a patriarchy, but if not all men are wielding patriarchy like a cudgel and wielding their privilege and, doing no domestic labour and financially abusing women and all the various other things they can do, even if they're not doing that, they benefit from the threat of violence that other men pose to women, because women are always aware that could happen to us.
That it's there. It's just lying there, isn't it? It's lying in wait. And that's what it was doing to me on Christmas Day. And like, every woman has a story of a man being violent towards them.
And yelling at them without even realising that they're yelling. Like, I once was talking to a male friend of mine who was trying to reform some of his past sort of ignorantly bad relationship behaviour, and he said, my ex-girlfriend actually sat down and explained to me once, because I'm, 6'5", and he's also like very much a debater, very, very articulate and has quite a deep voice. She's terrified in an argument with me. Even though I know as a man there's no threat of violence, I'm never going to lay a hand on her. That's not what this is about. But she's like, say, 5'5" or shorter. He's enormous and imposing, and he benefits from her fear.
Yes. I remember watching last year on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, Dicko having an argument with, I can't remember who it was, but it was a very heated argument and they had to tell him to pipe down because he was frightening her and he didn't get it and he kind of stormed off and everything and then ended up, talking to camera later and being so incredibly upset at himself, mostly for never knowing that, because his wife and him, they talk, and there is absolutely nothing in him that is a violent, like the man you were just talking about. But a woman who doesn't know him doesn't know that. And he was just so incredibly sad that, number one, he didn't know it and that he'd done that to someone just by being really passionately loud about something.
And isn't that one of the incredible privileges of patriarchal advantage for men, that they can go their whole life, like how old is Dicko? He's middle-aged.
Yeah,
or beyond.
60.
And he had never had to consider that before this time, whereas women are considering it from like young girlhood.
Yeah. And I'd say he's just never had anyone, because they're stuck, you're stuck in a vacuum in there and you're in this where you can't, like he's worked in the record industry and he's worked on TV. He's probably been protected by the reaction to him doing that many, many times. And no one's ever had to call him out on it. And he's never had to sit and listen because there's nowhere to go. I mean, he walked out of the camp, but there's nowhere to go. You can go to the toilet, but you got to come back in pretty quickly because there's nowhere else to go in there. So he had to deal with it. And I mean, that's such a wonderful part of that show. But it's really good that we have these kind of things on TV. Do you watch MAFS?
No, I don't. But I do
choice,
watch
obviously.
Clementine. Yeah. I did used to work in reality TV, so there's sort of like it's lost its veneer for me. But I do watch Clementine Ford's breakdowns of MAFS though, because I find them very entertaining.
Yeah, they're the best. She hasn't been doing them because, she's got bigger things to worry about. But there's just so many things that play out on that particular show that we have so much lessons from, and having someone like Clementine breaking it down. It's about to finish, but I'd really actually like to ask if she doesn't do them anymore, would you be interested in maybe taking over that? Because she was so, like, a lot of women really benefited from that, and you would be able to take that mantle very, very well. Because a lot of women watch that show, they don't understand they can't articulate what they're so angry about, and Clementine would really help with that, with all of her in knowledge. You would be exactly the same. So next season, would you do it?
That's the highest compliment you could pay me, that I could have as searing an analysis as my friend Clementine Ford. But look, I don't I don't think that she's going to hand it off forever. I think she's probably only just not doing it this season. But if she was to hand it over to me, it would be my pleasure to bring that knowledge to women and to bring that analysis to women. But I must say, like, the problem is sometimes I just can't handle watching that level of misogyny, like even to be able to critique it. Sometimes because of what I do, it's like you have to kind of protect yourself, and you can't be watching men be their absolute worst 100% of the time.
So, yeah, you do extra work that is for educational purposes for all these amazing followers that you have. But you work for a charity in the mental health space. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. So I actually have a day job because being an Instagram influencer is not very much a monetizable activity, and
not yet.
I couldn't live off
not
it.
Yet.
We'll see, I suppose. But actually, with this new political, this sort of suppression of political content, it actually includes, I think their wording was something like, things that could be considered social issues that affect a group of people, which is the most vague thing you've ever heard, because it covers everything, and it certainly covers feminism. So who knows? I'm moving on to YouTube at the moment as well, just so that because, Facebook and Instagram are Meta.
Yep.
I just need something that's a different company.
Yes. Yeah. Twitter's gone to shit. You need your backups.
I left Twitter
other options
a while ago because of how deeply transphobic Elon Musk is. And I do have TikTok, but I don't put enough time into TikTok to be to have a lot of traction there, because you do have to really learn the format of TikTok.
You do. You do. I'm just learning it now. I've only just found out. So this is really good advice for you. That's where you'll make your money. Like, that's where you can really make money quite easily.
Yes and no. There's no such thing as a creator fund for TikTokers in Australia at the moment. So you can't make money just off views, same way as you can't on Instagram. So for Australians on Instagram and TikTok, the only way to monetize really is to get brand deals. But of course, as a feminist, it's a little bit more difficult, because brands don't necessarily want to associate with what they might consider a radical ideology, even though I don't consider it remotely ideological or radical rather. But YouTube is a bit safer, because you can just monetize off views directly.
Right.
I think women should get paid for their labour. So,
oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Wouldn't it be lovely? Everyone would be wanting to do our work, to do the work for us and get paid for it, if there was actual, money in it. Now, tell me about your day job.
I am a digital marketing and content and social media specialist. Mm-hmm. That's about the size of it. That's what I do.
Do you enjoy the company that you work for?
I do, yeah. So I think it's important. I think it's important to kind of spend your years on earth doing something for the greater good, which I realise sounds very earnest and sanctimonious, but it's just something that is incontrovertible in me. So I have had jobs in the past that were for private companies or for profit, and I just don't find that I can kind of stand myself. I would much rather work for not for profit. Even when I was working in reality TV, I did feel a sort of a moral conflict about that, and I was trying to push my feminist agenda in Big Brother and make sure that we didn't use the most salacious shot of a woman getting out of a pool in a bikini, but I would always be overruled, because that's just what you have to do. Yeah,
that's right. So you were a writer for Big Brother. Which ones?
The Channel 9 ones, so 2012, 13 and 14. So I was it's called an online writer and digital producer.
Yeah. That would have been really interesting though. But trying to bring any kind of feminism into it, it would have been like pushing shit up a hill.
Very, very. I was just thinking before as well how you were saying maybe one of the reasons I don't watch a lot of maths and stuff like that is because I can't be buffeted by misogyny all day and then go home. Yeah. But the funny thing is that I work all day and then I go home and get buffeted by misogyny all evening, because that's when I'm filming my reels and making feminist content and weeding out troll men in the comments of my Instagram and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, see, I just think maths is it's almost like a buffet for us to pick and choose from. Men are shit. That's what I think maths stands for. And it's just a buffet of which man do you want me to talk about tonight? I mean, because they're all shit on the show and they all get never held to account. So that's what, Clementine did so well. But this particular season, there was a woman that came on this one, and it was really quite awful to watch, the abuse that was happening in her relationship. She came on the show because she'd been watching the show while she was with an ex and saw her relationship playing out on the screen. Wow. And went, oh my God, and everyone, really saying, this is coercive control, this is, really abusive, blah, blah, blah. And she then recognised what was happening in her relationship, so she broke up with him. So then she said, that's why I'm here. If you guys are going to make me break up with my boyfriend, then you got to find me a good man. Kind of, so that. It was great. And they found her a really shit man. Of course.
I think they do that deliberately on maths, if I'm honest.
They absolutely do. I mean, that show doesn't rate over 1 million people per night for nothing. Yeah. It is just at the end of the day another glorified theatrical, and that's why it's so incredibly important that we have voices pointing out just how obvious it is what's playing out on the screen. And, there's so many people that just, and mostly women, sadly, but people that flock to that kind of content and go, yes, because I don't know why I am so uncomfortable watching this. I've never understood, but I'm finally getting explained to why that's so wrong, and this is so wonderful. And, that has become the water cooler talk the next day. Did you watch, Clementine talking about while we were watching the show? And it's yeah, how good is it?
And I hope they do. I think the thing that worries me about something like MAFS is, Clementine Ford has about, I think, 250 or 300,000 followers. So not everyone who watches MAFS is getting Clementine's incredible breakdown of it, and I think a lot of people are going away from those interactions not necessarily understanding what they've seen and how harmful it is. That part I worry about, but on the other hand, I do understand that I think it is sort of edited and narratively played out such that you can see that it's troublesome behaviour, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, I think so. What I don't understand is how many women keep going on the show after seeing so many women being bollocked on the show and the men being held up. They never make the guy look bad. The guys make themselves look pretty bad, but the edits never really do. And at the end of the day, the women are the ones that cop it and buy the edit. And yet we just keep still applying for this show. It's such a weird, I guess fame is its own beast nowadays, and that's all that matters to so many.
And I think we can underestimate as well how deeply misogynistic Australian culture is. Like I lived in Scotland for 4 years when I was 19 through 23, and I came back to Australia having, that's a really formative time. That's a time where you learn to do all the very, very adult things. Yes. And I came back to Australia and I was like, why are the men behaving like this? Why? I was single as well. I came back single and I was like, why are the men like this? Because Scottish men, I'm sure, Scottish men, British men in Western culture all have these sort of patriarchal behaviours and subtle things and big things. But Australian men are just extraordinarily blatant. Like there's that phenomena of women in the kitchen at barbecues. The women all go to one place and the men all go to one place when you have parties in Australia, and the men don't actually want to talk to the women. The men are not interested in the women, and that was just so patently obvious from so starkly different from what I had experienced in Scotland, where all of the men I met, all of the friends my boyfriend made, because my boyfriend at the time in Scotland was a Swedish man. Again, another society where the men actually do talk to the women. They all were just very friendly and didn't have this strange separatist kind of way of behaving. And so I think that plays out when we look at how women get treated on reality TV shows, when you think Abby Chatfield is such a perfect example of that, where she's like every girl we know. She's not strange. An Australian woman recognises her and goes, yeah, she's just like my mate. She's modern. She owns her sexuality. She says what she means. This is a very, very, very Australian woman way to behave. And yet we were the network was able to kind of swing a narrative that vilified her, or the media vilified her, as though it was strange for her to behave that way.
Oh my God, it's just so true. And yet we still watch these shows. We're completely riveted.
Absolutely.
Sommer, thank you so much for coming on. Your time, your expertise, your beautiful voice.
It's been such a pleasure, Yvie. I love your podcast. I love the way that you speak to women, and I love the issues that you give voice to. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. I love you too. I really do. Please go and listen to go and watch all of Sommer's stuff on Instagram. It's Sommer Tothill. We'll put it in the show notes, obviously, so you can just click on that. Oh, what an absolute dreamboat.
Oh, thanks, Yvie.